So in this short video we are going to cover two main areas, which includes ethics and corporate governance, and we're going to see how these relate to the running and influences the activities of business organizations. So what are ethics? Ethics, according to the Oxford Dictionary, are moral principles that governs a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. This refers to the codes by which human behavior is guided, how people respond to each other, how they travel, and how business is actually done. These are personal decisions on the moral principles on what would be the right or wrong activity for an individual employee. Decisions linked to the values and the culture of an organization. Ethical values are the core benefits and standards that will dictate the stance a company takes in relation to its marketing, such as honesty and fairness. Sources of ethical standards includes, linked to fellow workers, family and friends, religious beliefs, the law, the country, the profession, the employer, and society at large. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail on these. So these could include things like, working hours. Is it ethical? Is it fair in terms of what you're expecting your employees to do? What about living wages? Are you giving the minimum living wage? Are you giving the statutory minimum wage according to the legislation of a country? Or are you giving a bit more? What about health and safety standards, workers' voices, equality, human rights, and child labour? And some of these again we're going to come back to later on to see how they apply to specific organisations. So these are some of the ethical decisions and ethical trade that companies and organizations must think about, or must they think about. Ethical basis of business decisions, which includes the moral, spiritual, religious philosophy, the value system and conscience, the culture, taking into consideration the climate, social, economic, political, competition, the impact of and consequences, the expectations of all stakeholders, and the requirements by legislation. The problem with ethics are that they're not based on laws, they're only based on values. People and businesses can only be encouraged to adopt ethical behavior, seen as a national, not as an individual issue. Therefore, difficult to encourage. For example, in the tourism hospitality industry, tourists to act ethically. Might appear in a country as the spirit of tourism, escape, relaxation. So when we're relating it to different industry sectors as well, so should companies do it? Because it could actually cost companies more money to follow certain ethical standards. But the thing is that, if we look at some examples in terms of a brand, reputation, like Marks and Spencer's, Blueberry, Topshop, Boohoo, Primark, and various other retailers, and they had to go into Parliament and to defend their practices. H&M slammed for failing to pay garment workers living wage despite their promises, and we've seen so many times when retailers in the UK have, obtained their clothes from other countries like India, and then they are employing, factories who employ children of a young age, 10, 12 years old, being paid pennies a day to work 10, 12 hours a day to make garments for these retailers, so people in the UK can get cheap goods because of the cheap labour. And other instances where you've had poor working conditions that have been so bad that the factory has collapsed, killing people who were making garments for retailers in the UK. Well, when no one knows about it, then you could make an argument that the companies don't really want to act too much, because they could actually pass the responsibility back on to the people running those companies. But these retailers are choosing and selecting these manufacturing companies, so they should really undertake their due diligence to determine what the standards are, who the workers are, and how much they're being paid, and what are the working conditions. Well, why is this so important? This is important because, as it says here, it can affect your reputation and your brand. And who wants to be going in to a retailer, buying cheap goods, and then having the thought that this was or has been made perhaps by a child, who are getting pennies a day or working in poor working conditions? It doesn't really fill you with confidence. And in today's society, with social media and various other communication mediums around the world, no company can hide now in terms of what they're doing. So I would suggest that ethical standards, and ethical standards in other countries, and the manufacturers and your wholesalers and all the people that you deal with along the supply chain is extremely important. And if you don't do it, then it could ruin your reputation, and it could reduce your profits, because people could go elsewhere to a more reputable organization to buy their goods and services. So if we now look at corporate governance, we can say this refers to the relationship among the board of directors, top management and shareholders in determining the direction and performance of the corporation. The CEO and chairman and companies should be separated. Boards should have at least three non-executive directors, two of whom should have non-financial or personal ties to executives. Each board should have an audit committee composed of non-executive directors. When we look at evaluating, governance, we're really looking at four different areas in terms of scoring a system, a corporate governance scoring system, in terms of four major areas, four major issues. And this includes the ownership structure and influence, the financial stakeholder rights and relations, the financial transparency and information disclosure, and the board structure and process. When we think about the trends in corporate governance, well, trends includes boards evaluating individual directors, smaller boards, splitting the chairman and CEO positions. Shareholders may now begin to nominate board members, and society expects boards to balance profitability with social needs of society. The role of top management responsibilities in terms of getting things accomplished through with others in order to meet corporate objectives, multidimensional and oriented towards the welfare of the total organization. The role of the board of corporate governance really includes to monitor developments inside and outside the corporation, to evaluate and influence management proposals, decisions and actions, and to initiate and determine the corporation's mission and specify strategic options. Additional trends in corporate governance. Boards shaping company strategy. Institutional investors active on boards now. Shareholder demands and directors and top management own significant stock. More involvement of non-affiliated outside directors. Increased representation of women and minorities. Society expects boards to be balanced and profitable with social needs of society, as previously mentioned. If you think about the degree of involvement from the board of directors, we can see them in terms of either high involvement with low interest, or low involvement with low interest, or high involvement with high interest, focusing on, for instance, partnership management. So these kind of like gives you an area in terms of the involvement of the board of directors, depending upon their level of involvement and their level of interest. So if we look at corporate governance styles, just as the board of directors, vary in terms of continuum of involvement in the strategic management process, so do management teams. For example, a top management team with a low involvement in strategic management will tend to be functionally orientated and will focus its energies on the day-to-day operational problems. This style of team is likely to be a little bit more disorganized or have a dominant CEO who continues to identify with his or her own division. In contrast to a management team with a high involvement, will have an active interest in strategic planning, and it will try to get divisional managers involved in planning so that the top management themselves can continue to scan for environmental opportunities and challenges. And the way companies are set up now and conduct themselves, the way they obtain their profit, and the ethical standards that they employ within their business are going to affect their reputation, because with social media and communication being quite free and fluent now, no one can hide in terms of what is being done within companies. And companies and people want to buy from organizations that are operating in the right way. Otherwise, they could potentially switch to your competitors, affecting your bottom line. So, corporate governance and ethics should always and should especially be considered now within your business organization.